with the momentum that we've built by having an effective opposition, the queer community and the pro-choice community quickly and effectively organizing and creating a response that has built momentum. And we need to capitalize on that momentum. We cannot let that go to waste. Too often, political movements will build the momentum, they'll gain all sorts of activists. They will radicalize them. They will get them clamoring for action to take. And then nothing is done with that. We cannot allow that to happen in this case. So I'm going to go into detail on exactly what we can do. And, typically when we do these, we have like an article or something like that we're going to go over. But we actually don't today. Because today we are drawing on my own personal experiences, which we will be getting into. Personal experience in being successful in advancing policy goals. And right now, with the threats facing the queer community, threats facing abortion rights especially, those are the things I'm going to focus on, though really these principles apply to any political battle. But given the situation about all of that, I think that right now, it's very important for us to learn these things. Anyway, the way that I'm going to be talking about how I've engaged in these political battles and how I think that the left can be more successful in defending our rights and advancing our goals and advancing our freedom. I am not aware of any lefty organizations that are really doing this to the extent that I would personally like to see. And that's a big problem. So we're going to address that today. We are going to teach ourselves how we can be more effective fighters in the political realm. I know that it's not necessarily fun stuff, but it is necessary. And so we're not going to be focusing on a lot of videos, but I did want to show you guys something. And so if you're in the Discord community, if you've been following me on TikTok, as you know, I have been pretty active in opposing LB 574. You're more of a cheerleader. Well, we definitely need cheerleaders. That's an important aspect of this fight. We're going to get into that actually a little bit. But if you've been following me on TikTok, or if you've been in the Discord community, you know that I have been working very hard to oppose LB 574 here in Nebraska. LB 574 was it passed, and it was actually signed by the governor today. The bill essentially bans gender-affirming care for minors. It pulls some sneaky tricks to get that done. It was sold as a compromise, as opposed to a more extreme bill or a more extreme version of the bill rather that had been previously introduced. But in reality is not a compromise. It's actually far worse. It bans any gender-affirming surgeries for minors, which in the state of Nebraska, that includes people who are 18 years old. Surgeries that rarely, if ever, occur in the state of Nebraska. I'm not aware of any gender-affirming surgeries occurring here in the state. But more importantly in that front, it also makes it so that the chief medical officer at the Department of Health and Human Services, who is an unelected bureaucrat appointed by the governor, gets to decide what level of gender-affirming care is appropriate for patients. That chief medical officer is appointed by our Republican governor who just signed this bill and has been adamant that they oppose gender-affirming care, not just for minors, but for everyone. So we know how that's going to work out. So essentially, gender-affirming care for minors has just now been banned. On top of that, because there was a proposed ban on abortion earlier this session that failed, and because that bill failed, they decided to amend this bill with essentially the text of that bill. It's not exactly the same. It's not as much of a restriction on abortion, but it is still a very extreme restriction on abortion. It's extremely dangerous to women. And one of the worst parts of that is that it contains an emergency provision. So from the second that the governor signed it, which again was this morning, abortions measured at 12 weeks from fertilization, so really 10 weeks and later, are illegal in the state of Nebraska. So the emergency provision made it so that even if somebody had an abortion scheduled within that time frame, right now, if they have an appointment, now that the governor signed that bill, that abortion is now illegal. It cannot happen. Hey, what's up? It's Arya from the future. I hope you're enjoying the view of my very messy room. I'm just popping in here because I forgot to mention one of the most important things about the abortion ban provisions in this bill, which are that it does not have any exceptions for fetal abnormalities. This will get touched on a little bit later on in the video because we show some footage from Megan Hunt's speech from the legislature floor where she mentions that according to the way that this bill is written, that even if, say, a doctor has been able to determine that a fetus has a brain growing outside of its body and therefore will not be able to survive, a woman would be expected to carry that fetus all the way to term. And that's absolutely insane and incredibly evil. And most abortion bans, even in other very conservative states, have a fetal abnormality exception. This bill does not, and that is a particularly evil thing to do, a particularly evil part of this bill, and so I just felt that it definitely needed to be mentioned here. So I just wanted to interject real quickly. Back to the video. And we are already seeing women being forced into back alleys because of this, essentially back alleys. I remember seeing a distribution in response to this of zines explaining DIY, do-it-yourself abortions, which of course are not the safest methods. They're definitely not the most pleasant methods, and that's the only thing that women will have to turn to if they're not able to secure an abortion within the time frame that this law requires. And obviously there are many circumstances that can lead to that. So right now in Nebraska, we are dealing with the fact that they have banned gender-affirming care and they have banned abortion at a certain point, which is pretty dark. It's pretty bad. There were some very courageous actions taken by certain legislators to try to prevent these bad bills from passing. There was a whole slew of anti-trans bills that were introduced. As I mentioned earlier, there was that more restrictive abortion ban that was introduced. And so far, this is the only one of those bills that was able to pass. The reason that we were able to block those bills, despite the Democrats being in the minority, the extreme minority in the legislature, is because Senator Michaela Cavanaugh decided to filibuster the entire session. She has been working tirelessly to ensure that as few of these bills as possible are able to pass. 12 weeks is so short. You're right. I've seen some statistics in Nebraska saying that only about 13% of abortions in the state take place at that point or later. However, I kind of doubt those statistics because, again, this bill measures from fertilization. So in reality, if we're measuring from a reasonable point like implantation, it's more like a 10-week abortion ban. So it's even worse than 12 weeks in my opinion. At least that's the way that I see it. But Michaela Cavanaugh was able to prevent us from passing a lot of other really bad bills. There was a bathroom bill that got blocked. There was a supposed drag ban, though in reality that ban on drag, it defined drag so broadly that any gender non-conforming person just existing could potentially be breaking that law. And certainly any gender non-conforming person engaging in any sort of performance, if a minor just happens to be there, happens to view it, anything like that would be committing a crime. So what I'm doing right now would be illegal were it not for Senator Cavanaugh's filibuster. If a minor just happened to stray into the chat room, I would be committing a crime in the state of Nebraska. Thankfully, that bill didn't pass. However, you can rest assured that the extreme right here in Nebraska are going to be trying to pass these bills again. And Michaela Cavanaugh is not going to last forever. There are term limits in Nebraska. We aren't going to be able to rely on her to filibuster again necessarily. So we need to be finding ways that we can continue the fight when she's gone. We need to find ways to get that extra vote. We failed by one vote on LB 574. If just one more senator had voted with us, we would have defeated the bill. So there are ways for us to win, and we almost narrowly won this one. And we did win the fight on other bills. So there are reasons to have hope. We can be successful. And I'm going to get into, so I've worked in politics a long time. I haven't done it for quite a while. The reason that I haven't done it for quite a while is because I used to be on the other side. For a long time, my career was advocating for things that are completely against my principles. I did this in lots of different ways. One of the ways that I did it was I guess you could say, essentially a lobbyist that fought on certain issues. My big thing was like pro-gun legislation, but I also did work on like anti-queer stuff, anti-abortion stuff, all of that. Obviously, that stuff doesn't represent my values anymore, and that's one of the reasons why I've been like uncomfortable talking about this stuff and why it's taken me so long to get around to it. But with the passage of LB 574, and more importantly, with the momentum that we've built by having an effective opposition, the queer community and the pro-choice community quickly and effectively organizing and creating a response, that has built momentum. And we need to capitalize on that momentum. We cannot let that go to waste. Too often, political movements will build the momentum, they'll gain all sorts of activists. They will radicalize them. They will get them clamoring for action to take. And then nothing is done with that. We cannot allow that to happen in this case. So I'm going to go into detail on exactly what we can do. But before we do that, I just want to show you some scenes from around the Capitol on Tuesday and Friday, the final 2 rounds of debate on this bill, because I think that it demonstrates the incredible power and courage and strength that this community has. I think that a lot of what happened that day from our side was really beautiful. I also think it demonstrates the ugliness of the opposition. But more importantly, I just want to highlight how strong and wonderful this community is, just to kind of give an idea of what it is that we're working with, what tools we have on our side. And this doesn't just go for Nebraska, and this doesn't just go for gender-affirming care and abortion. The principles that I'm going to be discussing, they apply to basically any sort of battle. So if you're wanting to advocate for environmental policies, if to protect the land that you live on, if you're wanting to I don't know, just basically any sort of political fight that you can imagine, you'll be able to use these tools that I'm going to try to give you to effectively fight and succeed and win. And it's not necessarily a fun topic, but it's a necessary topic. But anyway, let's get to looking at what happened at the Capitol today to kind of see exactly that momentum that I'm talking about. I know it's kind of weird walking
The fight for bodily autonomy in Nebraska.
And this crowd that you're looking at right here, this is the loudest and boldest group of people that I have ever seen in that building. I spent a lot of time in that building. I've never seen a group like this. They were so loud, in fact, that the speaker ordered the doors to the chamber be closed to, quote unquote, preserve the transcript. But we know the real reason why they wanted that doors closed, because they wanted to drown out the voices of the Nebraskans saying that this is unacceptable to Nebraskans at large. They wanted to do their work in silence so they didn't have to hear that dissent. They didn't have to hear the voices of the people that they were hearing. And as you can see, there was a lot of them.
This is what democracy looks like!
This is the entrance that they're saying is being blocked. People have been walking through it all day. And of course, the cops tried to shut us down a lot. Someone's walking through right now, not blocked, not in the grass. There was a number of armed fascists in the Capitol that day. That was just one of them. there was another guy who was being really aggressive and tried to start a fight with me. Obviously, I did not engage with that. And then, I mean, the guy was so insanely aggressive that even the police decided to intervene and kind of try to calm him down. And while the police were calming him down, I looked down and saw that he had a gun. So there was people there that definitely wanted to hurt us. And this is a group of folks, myself included, who after the cloture vote, there was one more vote after that to advance the bill on Tuesday. And so we got up together and chanted one more vote to save our lives, begging them to not take actions that were going to result in the death of trans youth, and the death and other really bad things for women seeking abortions. And of course, we got kicked out for that.
One more vote to save our lives. You can't debate on human rights. One more vote to save our lives. You can't debate on human rights. They're chanting one more vote to save our lives.
This is Senator Megan Hunt. Senator Megan Hunt has been, apart from Kavanaugh, has been one of only two consistent and courageous voices who have been speaking up for us this year, often to their great detriment. In fact, Senator Hunt has gotten so much shit for the stand that she's taken that she's felt forced to leave the Democratic Party because the Democratic Party is not being very supportive of her. Ultimately, they're not being very supportive of the queer community and of women's rights, unfortunately, which is a repeated pattern. And that's going to come up later on in our discussion. We cannot rely on the institutional political mechanisms that exist. We can't rely on the Democratic Party to fight for our rights, because that's not what they're about. They're not about fighting for our rights. They're about maintaining their seat at the table. They're about fundraising. They're about building political careers. And a lot of times the things that you have to do to fight for your rights are antithetical to those things. And the Democratic Party is never going to do that for us. And my subtitles are a little bit scuffed. It said field diagnoses. What she said was fetal diagnoses. And she's going to talk about, if this bill passes, well, it did pass. So even if a fetal anomaly has been diagnosed where the fetus has like a brain growing outside of its body and obviously isn't going to survive, a woman is still going to be forced to carry that baby to term.
Outside of its head. What is wrong with you? Or you're talking about trans children who are 4, 5, 6, who are 16, 17, 18, who can be all ages, but the way government is coming down in this body between a parent and a family and their child and a healthcare professional is unprecedented. It's unreal. And
yeah, small government Republicans, am I right?
Who spoke against Dr. Lindsay Hughes in Douglas County for saying during COVID-19 that we should be wearing masks in public places? Saying that Dr. Hughes was unelected and unqualified. Now she wants to have the chief medical officer of Nebraska saying what should happen with trans kids. You know why they like this amendment? I know why all of you like this amendment. It's because it makes the bill worse. Some veterinarian, some ear, nose, throat doctor, whoever, who is the chief medical officer at the moment for the state of Nebraska, gets to determine what the regulations around gender-affirming care is going to be for kids. And you think that's going to be something well-informed that makes sense? Just look at what happened in Florida. In Florida, they did that, and they passed some of the most stringent laws that we have. It's literally more restrictive than the original LB 574. So for those of you sleeping at night, patting yourselves on the back, saying, this amendment is really a great compromise. It's really harming kids more. It's really unconscionable. And to hear them out there saying one more vote to save our lives, it is not hyperbole.
And being able to hear protesters from out in the rotunda the way that they were right now, I mean, you can hear it coming through in the audio that I took from the balcony here. That's really unprecedented in Nebraska. I'm not aware of this ever happening before. Our side, the queer community, the pro-choice community, was just so dogged and determined and loud that on this day in particular, this was Tuesday, it felt like the building was shaking. There were so many of us, so determined, that the halls of the legislature were literally shaking. And they chose to do what they did anyway. They clearly do not care about the will of the people of Nebraska. In Nebraska, the people are often called the second house, because unlike a lot of states, we only have one legislative body. We have a unicameral legislature. We do not have like a House and a Senate. We just have one. And the people are often referred to as the second body. Well, the second body was there today, or that day. The second body spoke up, and the second body was clearly ignored.
To say that that's right. Just by introducing this bill, spikes to the suicide hotline in Nebraska, calls to the suicide hotline in Nebraska spiked. After the first round of general file debate, when we didn't stop the clock, by the way, calls to the suicide hotline spiked. They spike every time we talk about this. And we are going to lose somebody. We have already lost people in our community.
We have.
Over the last year, we have lost very, very important people in Omaha, Lincoln, and throughout Nebraska from the trans and LGBTQ community because
people have died because of this already. I didn't know them, but I know of at least one activist who lost their life to suicide while they were fighting another anti-trans action locally relatively recently. And these spikes to the suicide hotlines, that's absolutely true. That happens every single time this bill gets discussed. We have almost certainly lost trans youth already just from the introducing of these bills. And now that this bill is in place and it's going to be illegal for them to access care, we're going to lose more of them. And that is, of course, the intention of the bill. This bill is designed to kill trans people, specifically to kill trans kids.
They know that this is not a place where they are welcomed. Hundreds of people are in the rotunda chanting one more vote to save our lives, and it's coming down to one or two men who are scared. You can have at least as much courage as the trans kids and their families out in the rotunda who have to live every day, who have to go to school, and who, by the grace of God, get the courage to come here to their state legislature and say it to you.
That was the funniest sign I saw all day. I had to include it. And those glass doors that you just saw, those go right through the legislature chamber. So they were able to see and hear us that whole time.
Will become law in Nebraska as soon as the governor signs it.
All right, that's enough. You get the idea. So that's what we're dealing with. But like I said, I'm wanting to be positive here, and there's reasons to be positive. Grief, despair, anger, frustration, all of those things are absolutely justified. But so is hope and optimism, and so is a fighting spirit. As you can see in those images, and definitely if you were there that day, you were really able to see, this community is extremely powerful. It's composed of incredibly strong individuals. We can get through this together, but we cannot squander what we have built to fight this thing. The fight over this bill is not over yet, by the way. There's still going to be battles in the courts. But that's a battle for the lawyers. What I want to talk about today is how we can use this momentum, and just generally speaking, how on any political battle that is important to us, what it is that we can do, the principles that we can learn, the tactics that we can employ to block bad bills that will hurt us, to advance policies and get them implemented that would expand our rights and protect our community, and that sort of thing. So that's today's subject. As I've mentioned before, I did a little bit more preparing than usual. I have some notes and I have some stuff to show you. We're going to get into this, but there are tactics that the radical right has been using for decades to change what is possible for them to achieve. For a long time, it was very hard for them to get bills like this passed. And indeed, it was hard for them to get this bill passed, but it was a possibility, whereas it wasn't really a possibility in Nebraska before if somebody was willing to filibuster like Kavanaugh did. And all over the country, we saw this gigantic slew of anti-trans and anti-abortion legislation. And it wasn't possible to pass those bills before. Obviously, some of that is due to Roe v. Wade being overturned, but a lot of it is due to the political climate being changed, to the Overton window being shifted. So do you guys know what the Overton window means when I say that? I guess I should explain it just in case. The Overton window is essentially a concept that's used to describe what is possible politically to achieve, right? So you can think of it as like a little window, and it contains certain things that it's possible for us to get past or that it's possible for us to defeat. And there's only going to be a certain scope of that. However, that window can be expanded and it can be moved over. Right now it has been expanded and moving over to the right. What I want to do is I want to help us learn how we can expand it and move it over to the left. I have a great deal of personal history with this. My values have changed greatly over time. A lot of that has just been due to becoming more aware, more self-aware, realizing who I am obviously changed things, realizing that accepting that I'm transgender. That obviously caused a shift in a lot of things. But even before that, my views were changing. I was becoming more accepting of people. I was realizing what poverty does to people and how the policies that I had advocated for in the past were so crushing to people in poverty and kept them in poverty and that sort of thing. And so my views have shifted, but I used to work for the bad guys. I've worked for all sorts of organizations. I've worked for some national organizations that you may or may not have heard of. I've worked on campaigns for some real bad guys. I worked for a super PAC in support of Rand Paul, as an example. Rand Paul is one of the most rabid anti-choice and anti-queer extremists out there right now. And I essentially worked on his campaign. I worked on a super PAC supporting his presidency. I worked for the National Association for Gun Rights, which is one of the most extreme pro-gun groups in the country. And I still support gun rights because I honestly believe that gun control primarily harms marginalized communities, especially people of color. But the way that we engage in that battle, I do not support at all anymore. I've worked for Right to Work, which is like an anti-union organization. I've had my own organizations that I've run. I had like I called it at the time a pro-family organization. It was really an anti-queer organization where we were opposing legalizing gay marriage back when that was a big fight. I've done a lot of bad things that I'm not proud of. However, I was able to learn a lot of lessons from all of that. And I want to be able to use those lessons I've learned to help us to protect our community. You love unions? Yes, unions are essential. There has been a lot of work to break up unions and to limit their power, and it's unfortunately been effective. And this when I say that these tactics and these principles can be used to fight a wide range of political battles, unionization is one of those, and giving unions more power is one of those as well. But I have, to a degree, perhaps significantly even, contributed to this climate that's made these things possible. And I want to do everything that I can to contribute to a climate where we can reverse these things and we can make the world a better place. So, the particular way that I've learned to do these things, we often referred to them at the time as confrontational politics. And that's what I'm going to that's what I'm going to be referring to it as for the duration of this stream and this video. This is also going to be going up on YouTube. For lack of a better term, I would like to find a better term, so I'm open to suggestions if you all can come up with a better term that would accurately describe it and maybe be a little bit more positive and a little bit more reflective of our values. But essentially, what defines confrontational politics is that there is a distinction between access-based political operations and power-based political operations. So most political organizations, most activists, lobbyists, politicians, they work on an access-based model where they need to maintain a seat at the table so they can be involved in the discussions that happen behind closed doors, crafting legislation, strategizing with the powers that be, the institutional powers that be, the Democratic Party, the more institutional like nonprofit organizations and that sort of thing. It requires a certain level of civility, but what it also requires is not taking actions that go against the grain, and it limits your power. It limits your ability to fight. And maintaining your seat at that table is not worth that sacrifice. It makes you ineffective. Michaela Kavanaugh did not give a damn about maintaining her seat at the table. She did what she had to do and brought the session to a screeching halt, despite the fact that even people on her side were telling her not to. Senator Megan Hunt has been assisting her with that, and she's also been taking all sorts of extraordinarily courageous actions to the extent that Democratic leadership has been rather upset with her and has not been supportive of her. And other Democrats in the legislature, while saying that they support her and mostly voting the right way, have not really been supporting her outside of that. In order to effectively fight, we have to give up the idea that we need to maintain a seat at the table. It's not worth the sacrifices it takes to maintain that seat. This is also about, I would say, policy over protest. I'm not saying that protests are a bad thing. Obviously, I've been engaging in a lot of protests over the last week, and I intend to engage in more protests. And they are important. They're an important way of our community expressing dissent and influencing the way that people think about these issues. That's a good thing, but that's not what this is about. This is about policy battles. This is about passing laws and defeating bad laws. Because at the end of the day, that's where the power comes from. Because when a law is passed, the people with guns, the cops, the police, they enforce those policies. So this is about power-based politics as opposed to access-based politics. It's also marked by being more of a grassroots thing as opposed to an institutional thing. So there are large institutions that are important and support us as a community. Planned Parenthood comes to mind. But because they have to maintain those institutions, they're really hamstringed. Their hands are tied in terms of a lot of what they are able to do. But by being a grassroots movement where it's based on the people, it's based off of people like you and me, individuals who care about these issues, who care about our community, taking actions as a group together, we don't have those same restrictions. It's a way where a small but radical minority can effectively wield its power to advance our policy goals and to defeat the bad guys. So if you want to learn about those things, if you want to learn how to do those things, this video is for you. That's what this is all about. So confrontational politics essentially operates on sort of a cycle, a three-part cycle. It's a time-based cycle where there are three sort of distinct seasons, if you will, and those three distinct seasons dictate certain different sets of actions. Those parts of the cycle are the legislative season, the election season, and what I'm calling the fundraising and growth season. Every single one of those parts is just as important as the other. But they do require different tactics and different actions, and we're going to get into all of that in detail shortly. And the first one that I'm going to talk about is the fundraising and growth part of it. Fundraising is sort of a dirty word in a lot of leftist organizations. I am involved and volunteer with a sort of for lack of a better term, like a lefty anarchist organization here in town that does a lot of good work. And we are currently about to have our singular fundraiser for the year. We literally ask people for money one time a year. That's it. Because that's just sort of part of like the leftist ethic, right? Is that we don't want to be asking people for money. We don't want to be putting a burden on our community who is already overtaxed. So many of us already have so few resources that it's very uncomfortable to ask them to give us those resources. Unfortunately, it is a necessary component. It doesn't take a lot of money. You'd be surprised how much you can make a dollar stretch when it comes to these battles, especially if you do it smartly. And we're going to be discussing how to do it smartly. But it does take some money. Hey, it's Arya from the future again, and speaking of uncomfortably asking people for money, here is an ungraceful segue into me asking you for money. So, I just wanted to take a second here and mention that I do have a Patreon and a Buy Me a Coffee page. I am Arcane Arya with a Y, not an I on both platforms. On Buy Me a Coffee, you can give me a one-time donation. On Patreon, you can help me guarantee a monthly income to help me create more of these videos, create content across all of my platforms, and get my message out more often and more effectively. If you want to become a patron, you can do so for as little as $2, $2 buckaroonies. That's all it takes to support me financially. That's all I have to say. Let's get back to the video. I love you guys. Peace out. And so, backing up a little bit, when you're going to be engaging in confrontational politics, you're going to need what I call a centerpiece legislation. One or two specific bills or ballot initiatives or whatever it is that you're able to focus on and rally around on and essentially use that as a vehicle to fight everything else. So in this case, for the purpose of this video, we're using LB 574. Which was the bill that now passed that banned gender-affirming care for minors and banned abortion at a certain point. So we're using that as our centerpiece legislation. It could be anything, though. It could be, somebody mentioned unions earlier. It could be a bill that expands union power. It could be a ballot initiative that makes things safer for trans youth. It could be anything. But you've got to pick one, maybe one or two, and they have to be pretty substantial. They have to be very substantial. You can't pick like a non-binding resolution. You can't pick something that like it's got to be controversial. In other words, it's got to be polarizing. It's got to be something that the other side really doesn't like, and it's got to be something that even a lot of people that are ostensibly on our side, like neoliberals and the sort of people that make their career in politics, don't like, and that they say can't pass or that they say is impractical. It's got to be something like that. And so in this case, it's defeating LB 574. I guess you could say, I guess you could more accurately say that our centerpiece would be repealing the provisions of LB 574. So restoring abortion rights and restoring gender affirming care for trans youth. That is our centerpiece. And so the fundraising and growth phase, if we're keeping that centerpiece in mind, that's where we're at right now. We are in the fundraising and growth phase. That's where we're at in the cycle. It is true that the legislative season is still going on. There's overlap in these parts of the cycle. But in terms of that centerpiece, we are firmly in the fundraising and growth stage. In the fundraising and growth stage, we seek to raise money and gain volunteers for the fights ahead. There's a lot of different ways that you can do this. I have an example here. So, back when I was doing things that I'm no longer proud of, this is one that I put together. I had my own little organization that I was the executive director of here in Nebraska called Nebraska Gun Owners. And I'm not sure how clearly this will show up on camera, especially because of how bright the light is. But essentially what this was a petition. It was just like a general petition expressing support for gun rights and expressing like support for a specific piece of centerpiece legislation. On it, we asked for a signature, we asked for a printed name, an email, and a zip code. The signature was not super relevant. Obviously, if you're collecting a petition, I believe you have the moral obligation to deliver that petition. But that's not the important thing, because politicians aren't really persuaded by petitions. All the fields after the signature field are what's important. The name, the email address, and the zip code. The name so we can identify who they are and address them. The email so that we can communicate with them. And the zip code so that we have a rough idea of what legislative district that they're in. This is how you build your base of volunteers. This is how you build your base of donors. This is how you build your base of supporters. What I did, because of the nature of the fight that I was engaged in at that time, is I would mostly bring this to gun shows where a lot of who I would think of as my people at the time were showing up, and I would get them to sign the petition. They would sign it because they wanted to support this bill. And as soon as they signed that, and I put that shit into my spreadsheet, now I have them there and I can communicate with them and I know what legislative district they're in and I can activate them to do things in support of our cause. And I can ask them for money. I can ask for their support. I can ask them to call their legislators, all that sort of thing. So while it may not look like this for whatever political battle you are fighting, ultimately you're going to want something. You're going to want to adapt this sort of thing to your cause so that you can get volunteers and you can raise money, because you're going to need those things in order to fight effectively. The other thing that you do during the fundraising and growth phase is you're going to be recruiting candidates and possibly, if you're the right person for it, even running for office yourself. when it comes to recruiting candidates, you're looking for people who can potentially be champions. You're not looking for just any Democrat that can beat the Republican. That's useless. We have Democrats in our legislature. They're mostly useless. We have two useful ones, I would say, two that really stick their neck out for us. Those are the kind of people that you're looking for when you're wanting to recruit candidates. You're looking for the radicals. You're looking for the people that have strong constitutions, that aren't going to back down when party leadership comes down on them, that aren't going to give in when the other side starts to hurl insults and threats at them. Megan Hunt, as an example, there was an ethics complaint filed against her that, if it went through, could have some pretty severe consequences for her. And that ethics complaint essentially said that she had a conflict of interest on this bill, on LB 574, because her child was trans. And that's the kind of dirty and disgusting tricks that the other side is going to use against us. So we're looking for a champion that can potentially stand up to these sorts of threats that are going to happen, who are going to be strong in the face of pressure, and are going to take actions that are going to make them unpopular and ultimately will probably cause them to lose their quote-unquote seat at the table. And, I mentioned volunteers a moment ago. You're also just sort of building a list of radical supporters. You should also consider building a list of supporters for other issues as well that aren't related to your centerpiece legislation. The way that I did this before is, in addition to my main organization, like let's say the gun rights organization, I would also build other sort of side organizations on other issues. And I would do basically the same tactics, though not to the same degree, on those issues with those organizations so that I could build a base of supporters there. Because oftentimes the bad guys are going to be bad on multiple issues, and we can hit them from different sides. So in our case, maybe we have an organization. It doesn't have to even be a formal, legal organization. It can just be an informal group of people that are working and fighting together. But whatever it is, we can have an organization that's dedicated to defending bodily autonomy, to fighting for abortion rights, and fighting for trans rights. But it would also behoove us to say, find people that are very concerned for the environment. Because the people that are going to be bad on abortion issues and bad on trans issues are very often also going to be bad on environmental issues. So if we are also building that list and building that organization, even if that's not our main focus, we can have a centerpiece bill, a centerpiece legislation on that issue that we can activate them on, and we can use that as a tool to punish the bad guys and support the good guys. So it also behooves us to build supporters on other issues as well. And then the final thing that I want to say about the fundraising and growth stage is that it never actually ends. So other parts of this cycle, depending on the state that you're in, typically have a start date and an end date. So at the legislative session, it's based off of, or season rather, it's based off of when the session begins and when it ends. With the election season, it's based on whenever elections are held. And during the fundraising and growth season, obviously that's going to be your focus, but you're never going to stop working on that. You always need to be building a base of supporters. You always need to be raising money. You always need to be gaining activists and activating them. That part never stops. So the next part of that cycle is the election season. The first thing that you do in the election season, in my opinion, is you should be creating a list of all the Democrats that are running, and possibly also third parties, depending on the details of your state or wherever it is that you're fighting. You're going to build a list of all of the Democrats that are running. And then you're going to send to all of those two things. You're going to send them a survey, and you're going to send them a pledge. The survey is just going to give them like basically questions like, do you agree, or statements even. Maybe I kind of like having it as statements. So a series of statements and asking them to check off the box if they agree on the statement. So in our case, it might say, do you, the statement might be, abortion is essential health care, and women should have access to it. Check off that box. Transition saves lives. Lack of access to transition medical resources harms the queer community. Check that off. Youth should be able to have access to appropriate gender affirming care. They check that off, right? So that's what the what am I calling it here? That's what the survey is designed as. The pledge is a little bit different. So some of the people that you send this to are going to do the survey, but they're not going to do the pledge. The pledge is designed to help you find champions, to find the really strong ones. And the pledge will say something like, it can say a lot of things, but most importantly, you want it to say that that I am promising to introduce at least one piece of substantial legislation in this area every single session. So it could say, I pledge to introduce one substantial pro-choice piece of legislation every session. I will introduce one substantial piece of pro-trans legislation every session. And you can also include something like, I will force my colleagues to go on the record through roll call votes on anti-trans legislation. Things like that. That's what you want on the pledge. They sign it. They're sending both of these things back to you, and then you need to keep them. The people that you're sending this to, they're going to see this as opportunities to gain support from your organization. And to some extent that's true. Really what it is, if I'm being honest, it's a bit of a trap. It's a weapon that we're going to be able to use. And I'll go over how we use that weapon that we're forming in a little bit. But just know that they're going to look at it as an opportunity to help their campaign, when in reality it's a weapon that we are able to use. Once we get those surveys back, once we get the pledges back, then you're going to meet with the people who returned both of them. So you're not going to be meeting with the people who just did the survey. They're useless. Don't worry about that. Just keep that survey. We're going to use it later. But the people who signed the pledge, you're going to meet with them, and you're going to be feeling them out. You're going to be trying to determine if they can truly be a champion. A lot of that is vibes. A lot of that is going to be describing exactly the nature of your organization and what you do, and seeing how they react. It's kind of hard for me to say exactly what you're looking for, but you'll know it when you see it. You'll know if someone's a real one, if they're really going to stick their neck out for us. And that's what we're looking for. We're looking for the people that are going to risk their political careers, that are going to be willing to become unpopular in order to support our rights. That's the purpose of that meeting. You're looking for champions. Then, once you have your list of champions, you're going to start running ads. That's why you need this money. The surveys and the pledges, those cost money to send out too. And you may need to have a database, though honestly an Excel spreadsheet is usually enough, or Google Docs spreadsheet or whatever. But you're going to start spending money on ads. It doesn't take a lot of money. In the past, the primary way that I've done these ads is through mail. That's extremely expensive, though it is very effective. Every election cycle, mail becomes a little less effective because the older generation is primarily who responds to that. And obviously, over time, the older generation goes away. But there are inexpensive ways that you can run ads too. I've had tremendous success with Facebook ads. The beautiful thing about Facebook ads is you don't even have to rely on your own list of supporters. You can use Facebook's targeting methods to just deliver the ads directly to those people. You can do it by geographic location, so you can only be targeting people in a certain legislative district, and you can use Facebook's targeting algorithms to, for the most part, only deliver your ads to supporters. And because you're doing that, and because you're being as narrowly focused with your targeting as possible, you're targeting it to as small of a group as possible. You don't want broad targeting. You want narrow targeting. You don't have to spend a whole lot of money on these. You don't have to deliver a whole ton of ads in order to be effective. So that's a really cost-effective way to do that. There's other methods as well. You can get creative with it. You can even just like print stuff out and deliver it to people's doors, whatever it is that you want to do. There's all sorts of ways of getting your ads out inexpensively, but it does take some money. That's why fundraising is necessary. You're going to basically, in the districts where your champions are, you're going to be running ads that are that imply support for that candidate, and you're going to be running ads that imply that the opposing candidate is bad. The reason that I'm saying imply is because in the past I found the most effective way to do all of this stuff is under the auspices of a 501c4 organization. It's a specific type of nonprofit that isn't allowed to like endorse specific candidates. So you would have to frame the advertisement as just not saying vote for this person, but saying like, oh, this particular candidate is pro-choice. Or in the case of the negative ads, implying like, hey, this particular person is anti-choice. Or you could even like, in the case of primary elections where there's two Democrats running against each other, you can phrase it as a question. Let's say that person didn't return your survey or didn't sign your pledge or something like that. You can say, what is this candidate trying to hide about their position on abortion? So you're not directly even saying that they're anti-choice because maybe you can't say that, but you are communicating that this person is not someone to be trusted. So you're going to be running the negative ads and the positive ads in the districts of your champions. It's also a lot of times a good idea to run negative ads in the districts of vulnerable Republicans, even if you don't have a champion in that district, because a lot of times the Democrats that aren't going to be champions, they'll still like vote on our side most of the time, so that can be helpful. And obviously it's a good thing to if they win their election, so that's something that you can do. It's also a good idea to run negative ads regardless of party against people who have taken bad actions in the past as sort of a punishment. Politicians are not people. I mean, they are, but that's not how I see them. I see them more like animals, and I'm an animal behaviorist. And they are very predictable animals. If you start taking actions during the election, what about infiltrating the baddies to see what they're up to? Yeah, that's very important for a lot of reasons. That goes more to the protest side as opposed to the policy side. Though there are policy implications of doing that, and that's definitely a good idea to do. And so if that's something that you find yourself compelled to do and are able to do, I highly encourage doing so. It's just not really something that's within the scope of this video, but you're absolutely right about that. But anyway, what I was trying to say, it can be a good idea to run negative ads against Democrats that have taken bad actions and against Republicans too, to sort of punish them for those bad actions. Because if you do things during the election, that's when they feel the most vulnerable, right? Because they want to get reelected. So if you're doing things that they feel harm their chances of getting reelected, that's going to change their behavior over time. Like the Pavlovian dog, right? Punishment and reward gets the action that you're looking for. So when they do bad stuff, you whack them, and that makes them less likely to do the bad stuff in the future. And when they do good stuff, you give them a little treat. You give them a little positive ad, and they like those treats because they like getting reelected, and so they are more likely to do those positive actions in the future. So consider running ads appropriately, even for races where you don't have a champion. But you want to focus on the districts where you have a champion. The other thing that you can do is you can personally volunteer for the champions, and you can encourage your people to volunteer for the champions. So even if you're doing the 501c4 route, which again, you don't have to, it's an option. It's a cheap option, by the way. It doesn't cost a lot of money, and it can really help you. But regardless of what you're doing, you can personally volunteer for these campaigns. And a lot of times your champions are going to need help, because if they're really the kind of person that you're looking for, they probably haven't had a career in politics. They may not know how to run a campaign, or maybe they do know how to run a campaign, but they're just like overtaxed. They're just doing it by themselves or with a small group of people. One volunteer can make a big difference on a lot of these campaigns. And of course, you can also encourage your people, your supporters, your volunteers and activists to volunteer with them as well, which can make a big difference and help them to win their elections. So that's essentially how the election season goes in the cycle. So then next, the final part of the cycle is the legislative season. When the legislation... sorry, give me a second. I need some water. I just need a moment. This is emotional for me. So, when the legislative season starts, your first priority is going to be to baby your champions, okay? They're going to be in over their head. There's going to be people telling them, there's going to be party leadership trying to keep them in line already from the beginning before anything even happens. They're going to be preaching the values of party unity, that sort of thing. They're going to be saying things that are going to scare them. And you don't want to contribute to that fear. You don't want to be the person who's also intimidating them. You want to be the person that they look to as a supportive person, or the organization as a supportive organization, someone they can turn to when they need help. So you really need to baby them. I would not go into full detail on your legislative plan with them at the beginning, because you're going to be because if you do that, you're going to be telling them to do things that are going to alienate them from their peers, that are going to make them unpopular, that in some cases might make it harder for them to win their elections. I actually think that this stuff generally makes it easier for them to win their elections, but they may not see it that way. You're going to be asking them to do some things that are scary for them. So don't give them the whole plan right away. It's probably going to be too much for them. You've really got to baby them. And you're going to be providing bills to your champions. If you're able to write the bills yourself, that's great. It's actually a lot easier to write a piece of legislation than you might think. I've written a number of pieces of legislation that have been introduced in legislatures in different parts of the country. I have no political education whatsoever. Literally, I did less than one semester of college, and I studied computer science. I just learned this all on the fly. It's way easier than it looks. And a lot of legislative bodies actually have a department that's nonpartisan, that's just kind of part of the bureaucracy, that when a legislator introduces a bill, they review it and clean it up so that it would actually fit and be able to become law if it were passed. So it doesn't even have to be perfect. So yeah, you need to come up with these bills. You need to have your centerpiece legislation, your centerpiece fight, your centerpiece bill. Go ahead and write it for them. You can also hit up lawyers and organizations that will write it for you. That's the thing that exists, and a lot of them will do it for free. Be careful about who you trust with that information, obviously. But yeah, there are people who will write it for you. Your volunteers may be able to write it for you. All sorts of things. But however you get it written, you are bringing these bills to your champion, and you are saying, hey, You remember that pledge you signed where you said that you were going to introduce substantial pro-choice legislation this session? Well, here it is. Here's a bill that repeals the abortion ban that was passed last year, or whatever it is that your issue is. You're going to be giving them your centerpiece legislation and asking them to introduce it. This is going to be the stage where you will lose some of your champions. And you will find over time that you'll find a lot of people that you think are going to be strong champions. You're probably going to lose most of them. You may even lose all of them in any given session. That's okay. We're playing the long game. We're not playing the short game. The fight for our rights doesn't end after one legislative session. It happens every single legislative session. And just because we ostensibly lose one battle doesn't mean that we lose the war. And part of this whole model of confrontational politics that we're learning about and that we're engaging in is that we are choosing battles that benefit us, that benefit our community, that benefit our organization, regardless of whether we win or lose. And this whole process is designed so that every step of the way, whether we are successful or not in those individual actions, it helps us. It helps build the organization. It helps build the movement. It helps us raise money. It helps us change the action of the politicians that we are trying to affect. So it's okay that you're going to lose some champions. And this is the part where you're going to lose some of your champions, because some of them are going to give in to party leadership saying, hey, we don't want you to introduce that bill. They might, like in Nebraska, for instance, you can only introduce a certain amount of bills. They might say, oh, well, you know, I have these donors that want me to introduce this, and I have these other donors that want me to introduce that, and there's just no room for your bill this year. And anyway, party leadership says it isn't going to pass anyway, so I don't see the point. Okay, whatever, you've lost a champion. That's okay. It's important to punish that action. That is a bad action. Going back to our Pavlovian dog action, we need to give them a smack on the nose for that in order to change their behavior. You need to do it right away. It needs to be swift, and it needs to be harsh. I actually have an example right here. So, when I was doing the gun thing, one of the people that I thought might be a champion for me was a lady who, if you are in Nebraska, you've probably heard the name, Suzanne Geist. And she signed my pledge. She did my survey. She said she promised to her gun rights supporters in her district that she was going to introduce one piece of substantial pro-gun legislation each year. And then she didn't. So we punished her. We ran ads, and as you can see, this is an example of a really cheap ad. I just got like orange printer paper and just printed on it with black ink. Going back to the language of implication instead of like directly intervening in an election, which I wasn't allowed to do as a 501c4, the headline here, it says, is your senator about to betray gun owners? Your Senator Suzanne Geist signed a pledge promising to introduce solid pro-gun legislation each session. Obviously, in our case, we replace pro-gun with pro-choice or pro-trans or whatever. Senator Geist has failed to do so, and the deadline is fast approaching. Nebraska gun owners met with her to give her sample legislation, but she rejected it. Capitol insiders report that she may be planning to back out of her promise. Call Suzanne Geist today, gave the number for her office, tell her not to betray gun owners. That's it. Super simple. And what I did in this case was I had, because I had been doing my job during the fundraising and the organization building part of the cycle, I had a list of gun rights supporters in her district. And so I made sure that every single one of them got this. So those were the people that voted for her. Those were the people that donated to her. And in fact, I even had a list of people who had donated a lot of money to her. And I made sure that not only did I send this in the mail to those people, but I actually went to their door and left this on their doormat. So her number one donors were getting this thing saying that she was implying that she was about to betray them on gun rights, which she was. I wasn't lying. Even though I phrased it as a question, it was still truthful. It wasn't deceptive. And this caused her to freak the fuck out. She got real mad about that. We'll actually talk about her reaction to that in a little bit because it's going to be relevant to some other stuff that we discuss. But it was effective. The point is, it was an effective punishment. It hurt her. It hurt her because we hit her where it hurt. And where it hurts is the people that give you money and the people that vote for you when you're a politician. That's all that matters to you is money and votes. And we were putting her money and votes in jeopardy. So it was an effective punishment. And that's how we need to think about it. We need to think about hitting these people where it hurts. And regardless of what side you're fighting on, where it hurts for a politician is donors and voters. You also need to be punishing bad votes and bad actions. So when obviously a bad vote speaks for itself. If somebody votes in a bad way on a particular bill, you punish them for that in a similar fashion that we just discussed. But there are other actions that you may need to punish, and it's going to depend on the details of how the legislature works in your state, or if we're talking about ballot initiatives, how how those mechanisms work in your state and that sort of thing. So like for instance, removing somebody from a committee, like removing one of our champions from a committee where they're able to have a lot of influence, that would be a bad action that should be punished. So the people who voted to remove them from that committee, you would punish them for that action. And there's all sorts of things that can happen. It could even be a speaker not allowing a certain bill to be on the agenda. Whatever it is, bad actions and bad votes, you're going to punish in a similar way. And in this case, you're not just going to be punishing the Democrats that are supposed to be on our side. You should also consider punishing Republicans. Just keep your resources in mind and how much money you have to run on these ads and how much manpower you have to get these ads out. Because our messages are going to be more effective when we're talking to our people than it is when we're talking to the other side. So with Republicans, for instance, on the pro-choice issue, there's a lot of pro-choice Republicans, believe it or not. There really are. Or at the very least, there are a lot of Republicans who maybe they're not fully pro-choice, but they think that a certain level of abortion restrictions would be wrong. And so you can use that as an opportunity to punish a Republican for taking bad actions. Same thing with the trans issue. There's a lot of Republicans that just don't give a shit about the trans stuff, and they think this is like ridiculous and extreme and a government overreach, and they don't like it. There's a lot more than you would think. Or maybe they think that a particular anti-trans bill is like too extreme or whatever. So that can be effective, but your focus is going to be on punishing Dems, on punishing the people that are supposed to be on our side, because that's where we're actually able to be most effective. And ultimately, we will be changing the behavior of the Republicans over time, but we are going to have a far more dramatic impact on the behavior of the Democrats. Our tactics are going to be more effective in that regard. You also need to keep your supporters informed. You have a duty to do that. You have a duty to tell them what's going on. They're going to be looking to you for this information. They're going to be looking to you as an insider. And just by virtue of the fact that you're paying attention to this stuff enough to do these tactics that we're talking about, you are going to become essentially a subject matter expert, at least by comparison to the average person. So it is your duty to keep them informed. You can also use this, keeping them informed as a way to get to do calls to action, to call legislators about a certain piece of legislation or a certain vote that's going on or whatever it is. And giving your people something to do is tremendously important. You want to keep giving your supporters something to do all the time, as often as you're able to, so that they feel included in your organization, so that they feel like they're part of a movement. And ultimately, that's what you really want. You want them to be part of the movement. You're building a movement. That's part of what we're doing. That's part of why fighting these battles, whether we win or lose, benefits us, is because it helps us to build a movement. And so constantly giving your volunteers something to do, whether it's calling their legislator, whether it's volunteering to table at like an event, like maybe tabling at a pride event, whatever it is, keep them informed, give them stuff to do. That's a very important thing to do all the time. It's especially important during the legislative session and, of course, the elective session season. Ultimately, what we're wanting, well, we want our bills to pass and we want to defeat the bad bills. That goes without saying. But apart from that, ultimately what we want is we want roll call votes. We want recorded votes on as many pieces of relevant legislation as possible. In most legislative bodies, there are ways for people to vote on things where their vote doesn't get recorded. This especially happens in committees, where committees can approve or deny a bill before it actually goes to the floor. But a lot of times it also can happen on the floor where they're able to vote without it getting recorded. Most of the time, when that's the case, there is a mechanism for people, for legislators to call for a roll call vote or to take actions that would force the vote to be recorded. You want to do that as much as possible because you're wanting to get people on the record. Because you're able to then take that record and use it in a similar way that you're using your survey and that you're using your pledges. They become weapons in your arsenal that you can use. You can point to bad votes, and you can use them during the election cycle. You can use them to activate your people to call a wavering Democrat and make them do the right thing. You can sometimes even use it to salvage a champion. You can say, hey, look, this champion did a bad thing, and we thought that they were on our side. Call them and ask them what's up. And then all of a sudden, they're getting calls from their closest supporters, the people that gave them money, the people that voted for them, a lot of times people that they know being like, hey, why did you do this? What in the world? And sometimes that's enough to kind of get them back in line. So your champion can do this for you. Like I said, a lot of times there's a mechanism for legislators to force a roll call vote. And if there is that opportunity, your champion should be doing that. And if your champion refuses to do that, that's a bad action you need to punish them for. But hopefully you found good champions and they want to do that. They want to get their colleagues on record because they want to be able to fight back. So your champion should be doing this. And a lot of times leadership will come down on them for this because they will recognize that it's going to make some of the Democrats look bad because the Democrats have done bad things. Some of the Democrats have done bad things. And they're going to try to block them. They're going to use legislative maneuvers to try to block the roll call vote. And the champion may need to engage in some dirty tricks to get that roll call vote. Do things that are incredibly unpopular. Invoke rules that are very rarely used or that aren't used by mutual agreement but are still on the books. Whatever it is, it doesn't matter. Getting people on record is extremely important. The truth matters, and there's no way to get the truth out if it's not recorded. So it's absolutely imperative that you get as many roll call votes as possible, not just for the sake of the truth, though that is very important, but also because you're going to need that for future parts of the cycle. The cycle goes in a circle. It keeps going. It never stops. And you're going to be constantly building and building and building your power, and getting legislators on record is a huge part of how you're building that power base. If your champion's not doing it, sometimes you can bully some of the weaker Democrats into doing it. So a Democrat who's not your champion, but is on your side, sometimes you can sort of bully them into forcing a roll call vote by contacting a bunch of people who are on your side in their district, sending out ads, whatever it is, getting them to call that legislator and saying, hey, we need you to do this roll call vote. We thought you were on our side. Why aren't you doing this? That sort of thing. Sometimes that can work. It doesn't work as often as getting your champion to do it, and really that's your champion's job. That's why they're there. But if you need to do it, feel free to just sort of curmudgeon some of the weaker Democrats into doing it for you. And these things are going to make your champion feel a bit vulnerable, feel a bit scared, feel a bit beat up on by their colleagues, by their party, that sort of thing. So you really need to stand by your champion. You got to hold their hand through every step of the process. A lot of times, even if they're a staunch supporter of us, if they feel they can get out of taking a certain action that's really going to upset party leadership or upset their donors, they perceive it's going to upset their donors or whatever it is, they may use not knowing how to do something as an excuse not to do it. That's okay, because you will learn how to do it yourself. It's not that hard. Pretty much, I'm pretty sure that every single state has, oops, hit my microphone. I'm pretty sure that every state has something like this, but here in Nebraska, we have a little book that you can just get. I think it was free, or just cost a little bit of money, the rules of the Nebraska legislature. So if they're saying they don't know how to do something, you just look this shit up. Figure it out yourself. Tell them how to do it. Hold their hand. Help them do it. No big deal. So yeah, definitely encourage getting a copy of the rules of your legislature. You can also get, you should get a copy of your state's constitution and read up on that, because a lot of times the state constitution will have an effect on how things proceed in the legislature and what is and is not possible. So just hold their hand, babysit them. If they don't know how to do something, teach them how to do it with them. If they're getting scared, if they're having a hard time, hang out in their office if they like that. Talk to them on the phone. Tell them they're doing a great job. Pat them on the back. Say, hey, you're doing a really great job for trans rights, for reproductive rights, whatever it is. Encourage them, because they're going to need it. It's going to be rough for them. It's going to be rough for everyone involved, but it's going to be tough on them to truly be a champion. So make sure to stand by them through every step of the process. However, be careful with public praise, because once you have praised a politician publicly, you can basically never get that back. It's always out there. So something that I see a lot of political organizations tempted to do is, if they are able to, a 501c4 couldn't do this, but other types of organizations could, or individuals, or unincorporated organizations, they may be tempted to endorse a certain politician because they voted a certain way, or because they just sent in the pledge in the survey or whatever. Resist that temptation. Don't do that. Once that endorsement is out there, really once any sort of positive statement is out there, they can use that forever. They can always put that on their website. They can always put that on their mail. They can always put it on their ads, saying that this organization said that I'm pro-choice. This organization said that I'm good on trans rights. And even if you change your mind about that, and even if you educate a lot of people about that, it's not going to stop them from saying it. They can just say it for forever if they want to. There's nothing you can do to stop it. So privately, with your champions, you want to be praising their actions. Just be very careful about publicly praising their actions too much. That's another reason why, like, in your ads, it's better to just say, hey, they did this specific action, than to say, hey, this is like a really good guy, something like that, you know. In regards to that, I have a rule that I generally go by when it comes to public praise and really just saying anything in public about a politician, which is that if you don't have anything bad to say about a politician, don't say anything at all. As with every single rule, it's meant to be broken at some times, but generally it should be followed. If you don't have anything bad to say about a politician, say nothing at all. It's kind of the opposite of the advice that your mother gave you, right? Your mom said if you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything at all. Well, this is the opposite. You should, generally speaking, mostly be saying bad things about politicians, because you can't take the good stuff back. And honestly, those whacks on the nose are more effective than the treats are, than giving them the treat. That's just the way it is. And when you do choose to do any praise, make sure it's only for like really significant big deal actions. So like if your champion forces a roll call vote despite party leadership coming down on them really hard, well, that's pretty significant. You can praise them for that. You can run ads in their district, Facebook ads, whatever, saying, "Hey, look, they did this great thing," despite the fact that a lot of people were against them and telling them not to. If such an organization were operating during this last legislative session, when Michaela Cavanaugh kept up with her filibuster through the entire session, we could say, "Hey, look, she did this great thing. She did this courageous, incredible thing to her detriment. She's wonderful. She's doing this awesome stuff." So it is a good idea to praise truly significant actions, but only truly significant actions. And the final thing you're going to be doing during the legislative session is you're going to be preparing for future parts of the cycle. So just getting ready for the next part, which of course is the fundraising and what did I call it? Fundraising and growth season. Getting ready for that. And then the whole damn thing starts again. It never stops. And over time, sometimes very quickly, you'll be surprised by how quickly this happens. Sometimes it takes a long time. But over time, this will change what is possible in whatever political theater that you're operating in. So if you're operating in a certain state, doing this stuff is going to change the political possibilities in that state. The Overton window is going to move because of these actions. It's going to become more possible, in our case, to pass pro-trans and pro-choice legislation. It's going to become more possible to defeat anti-choice and anti-trans legislation. Things like that. Sometimes that progress will happen very quickly. Sometimes it will take decades. I mentioned the past organizations that I've worked for. Right now, I am seeing my actions in the state bearing fruit. Those actions took place back in like 10 years ago, like 2013 and stuff like that, and a little bit later, unfortunately, but not a lot later. But yeah, so we are many, many years downstream of those actions that I took, and unfortunately, I contributed to the environment that we find ourselves in now, where something like LB 574 is able to be passed. And it might take that long. It might take 7, 10, 15, 20 years of work. But you will, if you stick to it, if you stick to the plan, if you don't break your own rules, if you maintain your radicalness, and you keep building a base of supporters, you keep finding volunteers, you keep getting activists, you keep giving them things to do, you keep raising money, you keep recruiting candidates, you keep taking care of your champions, and doing all the things that you need to do during the legislative session. If you do all this stuff, over time it is going to change what's possible. So when I said earlier that there's reasons to have hope and optimism and a fighting spirit, there really is. We have more power than we realize, especially if we take the long view of things. And I don't want to be too discouraging. Sometimes this stuff happens really quickly. And I think if you start doing this stuff right now, either as an individual, as a group, start an organization, whatever it is, even if you're just recruiting candidates in the local area where you live, and maybe just printing out leaflets like I showed you and putting them at doors and stuff like that, just in the legislative district that you live in, that's going to have an effect too. That's part of it. And you may be surprised by how quickly that can have an effect, especially right now, because on these issues in particular, the Republicans are really overextending. I can't remember what state it was. I want to say it's Arkansas. I could be wrong. But there was a poll done recently in a very conservative state where they asked what people thought about all these various anti-wokeness actions that Republicans were taking. And they found that if I'm remembering right, around 2/3 of likely Republican voters did not like those things. They thought that they were too extreme, or that they shouldn't be a focus for the party, or whatever it is. So the Republican politicians, the extreme right wingers that are in office, are taking actions that aren't even popular among their supporters. Meanwhile, our side is building a giant movement. I showed you those images earlier on from inside the Capitol, where hundreds and hundreds of people in the queer community and people who support or who are pro-choice, they showed up and they chanted and they stomped so hard that the halls of the legislature were shaking. When I said that I've never seen a group of people like that in there before, I'm not kidding. I have never seen that before in my life in that building. That's like nothing that I've ever seen. We're building incredible momentum. Incredible momentum. And people did incredibly courageous things. People did things to oppose this that got them sent to jail. There were on Friday. There were women in the balcony that were like throwing dirty pads down from the balcony in opposition. There were people that were in that building. I showed you that guy with a gun. There was a lot of other bad guys, probably fascists with guns that were there to intimidate us and probably looking for opportunities to commit violence. And hundreds of people showed up anyway and did what they had to do to oppose this. Hundreds. That's not something that typically happens in this state. We've built incredible momentum, and it would be an absolute crying shame if we squandered it. So we need to exploit the fact that the other side is taking actions that are not popular with their base, and that our side is building a movement, building momentum, and stepping up and being radicals for the right cause like we never have before. We can squander this. We need to use it. The time is now. The time to start doing these things is now. That's why I'm talking about it, despite the fact that it makes me tremendously uncomfortable, because this is where we're at. Every crisis comes with its own sets of opportunities. LB 574 passing was a bad thing. It was a bad thing that it was even introduced because it increased suicidality in the queer community, as we discussed earlier. We've lost people because of these battles already. People have died because of this, and we're probably going to lose more. So I'm not saying that it was a good thing that LB 574 was introduced, and I'm definitely not saying it was a good thing that it was passed. But it does create an opportunity for us now to build a movement, to build an organization, so that we can be effective and take these actions effectively and change what's possible in Nebraska. And no matter where you live, if you live in Missouri and you're dealing with the battle there, or Florida, or Oklahoma, the same thing applies to you. And there are moments in every sort of political battle, with the environment, with unionization, all sorts of things. There are going to be moments like this in those fights as well. And even if you don't find yourself in that moment, the fact is doing all of this stuff benefits you every single step in the way in building that movement and changing what is politically possible. So please, if you are able to, please fight. If you're able to lead a movement like this, do it. If you're able to just do some of this stuff in the district that you live in, do that. If you're able to support the people who are doing this by calling your senators, by donating to them, by volunteering for the right candidates, please do that. It's extremely important, and now is the time. A couple of points that I wanted to make. Mostly warnings about what will happen when you really engage in this stuff hardcore. First things first, a lot of people are going to give you advice. A lot of people that are supposed to be on our side are going to give you advice, and it's going to be bad advice. It's going to sound like good advice, but it's going to be bad advice. It's going to be saying that now is not the time for your bill. It's going to be saying that your tactics are too extreme, whatever it is. It's going to say that, oh, well, we have this person who is saying behind closed doors that they're going to vote on our side, but not if it's a roll call vote or whatever. They're going to come up with stuff. Don't take that advice. What I have found to be, thank you, Molly. I'm proud of you too. You're also a very wonderful and loving and supportive person, and you do a lot to support our community. Believe it or not, your words are very supportive to people in the queer community that happen to be in the streams that you're in. But what I found useful when someone like that gives me a piece of advice is to ask myself, how might it benefit them if I follow this advice? And I've never known that to lead me to astray. If I follow that to its logical conclusion, I am almost able to find a reason why they're doing it, and it's not because they have my best interest in mind or because they have the interests of the community that I'm trying to support in mind. It's because they have their own political careers in mind. So, when someone gives you a piece of advice, maybe just don't listen to it at all, or at the very least, ask yourself what that person stands to gain if you follow that advice. Some more warnings. If you really get into this stuff, you're going to lose some friends. People are going to say nasty things about you, and it's going to result in people who have been your allies and your friends before turning their backs on you. Unfortunately, that's the way it is. You won't be able to maintain your seat at the table. So if you're somebody who has enjoyed being able to openly speak with Democratic politicians and party officials and stuff like that before, there's a pretty good chance you're going to lose access to that. You got to be okay with that. And to be honest, it's no loss. Fuck those people anyway. You're going to be accused of working for the other side. They're going to say that you're secretly a Republican plant, that you're not really a Democrat, that you're not really a progressive, a liberal, whatever it is, that you're not really pro-choice, and that you're doing these things to harm the movement. They're going to do that to dissuade you, to demoralize you. Trust me, it works. It does make you feel shitty. I've experienced it before. You just got to power through it, ignore it. Again, keep in mind what they stand to gain if they demoralize you in this way. They're also going to use it to demoralize your base, which is unfortunate. It will cause you to lose some supporters. That's just the way it is. Just know, just keep in mind what you're fighting for and your reasons for fighting, you know. It helps to have a strong, philosophical base in your heart to know what you believe and what you're fighting for and why that's important to you. That goes a long way in helping you get over the accusations that you're, secretly working for the other side or something like that. And finally, it's entirely possible that they will threaten you or maybe try to buy you out. That happens too. But threatening also happens. So, we were talking about Suzanne Geis recently, about how I had done some things that really upset her. She got real damn mad, and she decided to do things to try to hurt me. If I'm remembering right, I might remember some of these details wrong because it was a long time ago. It was a really long time ago. But her legislative aide's husband at the time was the city attorney or state attorney. I don't remember the actual name for the position. Whatever it was, they had some sort of influential legal position either with the state or the city. And they used that position to try to bully me and threaten me by sending legal notices to me at my house, implying that I may have, filed my 501c4 papers wrong, and other thinly veiled legal threats. I knew that these threats had no teeth, and so, but they still had an effect on me. They still freaked me out. They still caused me an incredible amount of stress. Around that same time, and I cannot say for sure this was related, but around that same time, when this didn't happen before, all of a sudden, a lot of freaky, scuzzy weirdos started showing up at my house and like going through my mail, like opening my mailbox and looking through it, going through my trash cans and that sort of thing, and like being loud about it so that I noticed it. I can't prove 100% that it was connected, but it have been at the same time. And I have seen very similar things happen to other people when they've engaged in these sort of confrontational politics. I've known people that have had their lives threatened for doing these things, like directly threatened. I've known people who have lost their careers because of this. All kinds of things. I've known people, business owners, who city councils suddenly start denying permits that they need to run their business. I wouldn't say that these sorts of really extreme counteractions by the people that you're upsetting are common. They aren't. But they are a possibility. They could happen, and you should prepare yourself for that possibility and know the risk that you're taking. I don't want to discourage you too much. That's not what I'm trying to do. That's very rare that it ever gets to that point. And if you know anything about Suzanne Geist, you know exactly why she did that kind of shit, because she's just an incredibly evil woman, one of the most profoundly evil women working in politics in Nebraska right now. So that explains what happened there. But it's something that you need to be aware of, and something that you need to sort of steel yourself for. And that's all that I really got to say on the subject. So for anyone who's still around, if you have any questions or you want to continue talking about this subject, that's totally fine. I'm going to take a quick break to get some more water and go to the bathroom, and then we're going to go play some more Psychonauts, because this has been exhausting and not super fun. And Psychonauts is very fun, so let's get back to that, yeah? I'll be back as soon as I am able to. As soon as I pee and get my water.